Okay, once again, thank you for joining us. This is Jody Patterson. I'm Client Care Manager with Oasis Solutions, and thank you so much for joining us for our Tips and Tricks webinar today. Pam Scott is going to be doing the presentation on sales order tips and tricks today. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get started, and then I'm going to turn it over to Pam. First off, you are going to be muted throughout the duration of the webinar, but we do want you to ask questions and encourage you to put those into the Q&A window at the bottom of your Zoom conference session there. And as they occur to you, just go ahead and pop them in the Q&A, and I will monitor that, and Pam will pause at moments throughout the webinar for us to cover those questions. Also, if you are just now joining us, please pop your company name and city and state where you're joining us from today into the chat window, just so that we have a better idea of who all we have on the line. And with no further ado, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Pam. Take it away.
Thank you, Jody. Everyone should be able to see my Sage 100 screen at the moment. So I want to, again, thank you for joining us today. Sales order, we could probably spend a half a day talking about all the different things that you can do in sales order and the various features and functionality. So I'm going to highlight some of the areas today, and I'll get through as much as I can during our time allotted. As Jody mentioned, I will stop periodically to see if there are any questions. I will answer those, as many of those as I can during our allotted time. If it's something that's going to get into a lot more detail, what I'll do is I'll have Jody make a note of who's asking the question, and then I will be glad to follow up with you after the presentation and send the time that you need to answer those questions. So, as we're getting started today, we're looking at Sage 100, the Sage 100 Cloud, and I'm working today in the 2020 version. And we are going to start with a couple of things in the setup features within the sales order module. And as we get started with this, the main reason that individuals use the sales order module is if they have inventory. There may be some other reasons, but that's the primary reason. If you have inventory management and you're wanting to track your inventory and what you have on stock and selling it to your clients and so forth, you're going to use the sales order module because that does integrate with the inventory module. It also integrates with job cost. If you do not have inventory, then most folks would just use the accounts receivable module and use miscellaneous charge and item codes and do their billing that way. You do have to obviously have accounts receivable if you are using sales order, because that's where your client database is maintained, as well as where you do your cash receipts and so forth related to your sales. So the first thing we're going to take a look at, we're going to cover just a couple of things within the sales order options. And on the main screen, the first thing that I wanted to talk about was enable shipping. And this is a feature that I find that most folks are not utilizing. And we'll talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, but this is a way to actually fulfill your orders through a shipping feature within Sage 100. It allows you to also print packing slips, and if you want to, it will even allow the person doing the shipping to generate the invoice. So that's where this feature is, and so in order to be able to even have access to it within Sage, you have to have that box checked. So the next thing that we're going to move to is the Entry tab. And I wanted to show you this feature down at the bottom left where it says Files to check for duplicate customer PO numbers. So if you require that your customers always provide you with a purchase order number, and then that's very important to how you process your orders, and how you maintain the information about those customers, you can set various areas within Sage to double check to see if that PO number has been used before by that customer. So you can have it checked during sales order entry. You can have it checked during sales order invoice data entry, during sales order history, accounts receivable invoice data entry, and accounts receivable invoice history. So if you want it to look for duplicate PO numbers, you can pick and choose which of those areas you want it to go out and look at the PO history in those files to let you know whether or not that PO number has been used by a customer previously. And then we're going to move over to the printing tab. And on the right side of my screen, you see there's a section where you can decide what all recap reports you want to print. So as you know, when you're updating your invoices and you've got your sales journal, you can also get recap reports at the end of that update. So there are a lot of reports here. So if you're thinking, you know, I always get a lot of these recap reports, I never take a look at them, we really don't need them, you know, it's a waste of paper or a waste of clicks trying to get through them. Within this printing tab, you can determine which recap reports are important to you. And this setting is on a company by company basis. So you may prefer certain recap reports in company ABC, but in your company XYZ, you need different reports, or maybe you don't need a recap report at all. So this is where you can go in and determine which of those recap reports you would like to print. And then finally, in the setup options, we're going to take a look at history. And we're going to look at the area to the top left. And this is asking if you want to retain sales order and quote history in your system. And most individuals probably do want to keep that history. So it's going to show you any canceled sales orders. It's going to show you any deleted sales orders so that you can track that. And then it has two questions. If you check this box, then you have two other areas. One is to retain deleted sales orders and quotes. And then you have retain deleted lines for sales orders or quotes. And your options are yes, no, and prompt. If you say yes, then it retains them. If you say no, obviously it doesn't retain them. And if you select it to say prompt, when you go to delete a sales order or a quote, it is actually going to prompt to pull up a prompt on the screen, and you're going to have to give a reason code as to why you're deleting that sales order. And the same with the line. So let's say that that a quote, you send a quote to a customer and it has 15 line items on it. And they send it back and they say, you know, we want the first 14 line items, but the last line item we decided we don't need. We'll purchase it later. So you remove that from the quote. And again, if this is set to prompt, it's going to ask you why it's being removed. I'm going to show you in just a moment where those reason codes are set up. And I believe there's a few that are canned reason codes that come with Sage, but you can set up as many reason codes that are applicable to your personal business as you need to. And you may be asking why you need to do this. I'll give you an example of where this comes in handy. Let's say that you have a walk-in traffic and you have a counter and the client comes in and says, you know, I want this, 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 and this. And maybe it's a cash transaction. You know, unfortunately, the person working at the counter could create that sales order, pull the merchandise, complete that transaction, take the cash for that sale, and then if you're not tracking these deleted orders, they could go in and delete that order and you would not have any idea that that transaction had taken place. You're not going to really start noticing anything until you start doing physical counts and you find that merchandise is missing. So, you know, you would hate to think that anyone would do that, but it has happened. And so that's a good reason of why you want that to prompt. So let me take you to the area where you're going to set up those reason codes. So I'm going to exit out of here. And under the setup, you also have cancel and reason code maintenance. Now, again, we have some that are set up here. You know, their credit was exceeded, so they couldn't complete the sale. You had insufficient quantity, so maybe you couldn't fulfill the order and they needed it right away. They found a better price. Also, using these reason codes will help you determine, you know, why are you possibly losing a sale? Is it because you're constantly seeing that your clients are finding a better price maybe with your competitors? So maybe you're needing to rethink your pricing. Maybe you find that you don't have the quantity in stock that you need in order to fulfill these orders. So you may want to increase your quantity on hand on particular items if you see that you're running into that situation. So again, you can continue adding to this list. It's easier to find. And then if any of these are no longer applicable, so let's say that you don't have credit limits on your customer and you don't check that credit limit when you're making a sale, then you can make that inactive just by clicking on this box to make it inactive. So you can just go down and add or make inactive whatever you need to in this area. So I did want to show you those codes and to give you a couple of reasons about why those may be important to you in tracking that information in your business. So I'm going to go ahead and accept that. And that takes us through some of the things that I was going to show you in the setup. One thing I wanted to talk about very quickly is that I wanted to show you a new feature related to sales order that was added to Sage 100C, or 100cloud, excuse me, with the release of version 2019. Obviously, that feature flows over into the 2020 version. So I wanted to take a quick minute to show you this feature, and then in a few minutes, I'm going to, we'll talk about something that was added to 2020, and then Jody's going to get into more detail about that new feature at the end of today's presentation. But one of the things that was added with 2019 related to sales order is that if you use the emailing feature in Paperless Office, so, you know, if you're emailing in sales order, you could be emailing quotes, you could be emailing sales orders, you could be emailing sales order invoices. One of the things that they added, and let me just grab this. Okay, this is applicable to the sales order invoice form. So you know that you have fields that you can merge into your subject line that will pull basically from Sage. Also, you can use those merge fields in the body of your text as well when you're emailing them that invoice. But they have added the tracking number. So if you use tracking numbers within Sage and have that information, you can also include that in the subject line and or body of the email when you're emailing the sales order invoice to your client, and it will reference that tracking number for them. So I did want to make you aware that that was a new feature starting with version 2019. And what we will talk about later in the presentation is with version 2020. They have added e-invoicing, and we will get into a lot more detail about that and tell you about that new feature and how it can help you streamline your receivables, and also how it can make a big difference if you're having to work remotely and dealing with COVID, and making things much easier on your client side as well as yours. So Jody, I'll just stop for just a second before I move to the next area to see if anyone has any questions on anything that I've talked about so far.
We do not have any questions, but I also wanted to clarify under that electronic delivery where you were just showing us that you could include the tracking information, what version did that electronic message become HTML enabled? Was that in 2019 or 2020?
I am not sure about that, Jody.
Okay, just wanted to point that out in case anybody else noticed. You can now add formatting, HTML formatting, to the body of that email message just to make that electronic delivery of your sales orders, quotes, etc., look a little bit nicer.
Okay, thank you. So what we're going to do now is we are going to move to the area to talk about the different things that you can do within sales order entry. So when you are in sales order entry and you use the next sales order number, it's going to default to whatever your system date is. So you can obviously change that if you need to. You can override that. And it also defaults to the order type of sales order. But you have various things that you can do in here. You can have back orders. You can do master orders or repeating orders, and we're going to talk about both of those in just a couple of minutes. You can also do quotes. So if you like to prepare quotes for your customers, it's not something that you have to do manually. You can certainly use Sage 100 to prepare those quotes, send them to your customers, and then if that quote is accepted by your customer, you can actually then, through Sage, turn that, that quote directly into a sales order. So you're not having to rekey the quote information into an order. So it's something that's very seamless that you can do. There's a special form within Sage 100 for the quote. So at the top, it can, it can say what the, it can actually say quote. You can add any type of verbiage that you want. You can give it an expiration date so that if your quotes are good for 30 days, if this particular quote, it's a special deal and it's good for 10 days, you can go in and make that expiration date whatever you want. So I did want to show you that there is a quote feature in there. I'm going to go ahead and cancel this. And then we're going to talk about master orders and repeating orders and what the difference in those two types of orders are. And I have a couple already set up that I'm going to show you. So this particular order, I said that the type was a master order. So if you think of a master order, it is more of some people might call it a blanket order. Some people also use that term for repeating order. But a master order may be that my client calls me and says, in 2021, we project that we're going to order 10,000 widgets from you. What type of a price break can we get if over the course of 2021, we order 10,000 widgets? So you can prepare for them a master order. Again, it can have an expiration date. And when you go to the Lines tab, this is where you select the items that are on the master order and what the original quantity is that they are ordering. As they want to order against that master order, and I'll walk you through this and show you how that happens, you're going to issue a standard order referencing the master order. And if you'll notice, I already have one standard order issued against this, where the client, the customer took one of each of these items. So it actually shows me how many is left on the master order. And if I go back to my header tab, it shows me the last time that there was an order placed against it and what that order number was. So if I wanted to issue a standard order against this, so my customer calls me next month or next week and they want to take more of this merchandise, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into sales order entry, give it an order number. I'm going to say the type is standard, but I'm going to reference the applicable master order. And you'll notice when I do that lookup, it shows me any repeating or master orders that I have in Sage. So this is the applicable master order. It brings in the customer, it brings in their original PO number. If I need to change the ship date or any of this other information, I can. When I go to the Lines tab, it basically is showing me what's left on that master order, but I can change these quantities to whatever I need to. So let's say this particular item, they want to order 2, and this one they want to order 1, and I'll go ahead and accept that. Then I would go to my Totals tab, and I would accept this, and then based on that sales order, the standard order against that master order, that's what I'm going to invoice to the client. And we'll go back and look at that master order in just a couple of minutes so that you can see what it did. A repeating order, and let me just type in the number. A repeating order is basically set up the same way. And also you notice that there is a cycle code listed here as well. If you have customers that say, we're going to place an order for 15 of these connects, 12 of this item, and 22 of this item, we want to place that order the first of every month. You could use this cycle field to create your own code that indicates the first of each month. So you could have multiple repeating orders in your system that are to be, where you're going to be generating a sales order the first of each month, the 15th of each month. You can do it without the cycle code. This is just if you're wanting to automate the selection. So if you wanted to do something as simple as, you know, IS for the first, you could just do 01 for the first, and then if you have some that wanted the 15th, you could make it 15. It's really up to you. You'll notice there's not a lookup here, so you have to be consistent. If everyone that does sales orders would need to know that if 01 translates to the first of each month, then everybody would need to do 01. If some of them did 01 and some of them just entered a 1, then if you're doing an auto select to create those orders, you would have to select both of those cycle codes. It's not going to know that 01 and 1 mean the same thing. So you do need to be consistent with that. But again, a repeating order is something where instead of maybe drawing out a huge purchase over a 6-month or 12-month period, this is something that they're going to want to order frequently. It might be on a weekly basis, it might be on a monthly basis, it might be on a quarterly basis. And what this really allows you to do is it allows you to create that standard order and not have to enter these line items every single time. So you might be asking yourself, well, what if one month they say, you know, they want to issue they want to do the repeating order, but one of those items they don't want this month, they don't need, they haven't sold enough. That's very simple. You're going to just create a new order. You would reference that repeating order. You're going to go to your Lines tab, It's going to fill in that quantity, and if this is an item that they did not want this month, then from within the standard order, you're just going to go up and actually remove that line. If they decide, you know, hey, business is really slow because of COVID, and we really can't take 15 this month and 12 of this item, we only want 10 of each, you can also override that here. And with that, it's not going to change the quantity or any of the detail on the repeating order. It's just affecting this particular standard order. So those are the differences between a master order and a repeating order versus a standard order, which just can kind of be a one-off thing. So Jody, I'm going to open that up to see if anybody has any questions.
No questions at this time.
Okay. So what I did is I went back in that master order that I referenced a few minutes ago. You will see when I go back into it, it actually now references the last order number that I just did against it. And then if I go to the lines tab, it is now tracking that balance for me as well. So I did want to make you aware of both of those features. And let's talk about something else for a minute. Let me just grab standard order here and go to lines. Now, when you're doing a sales order entry or any type of entry in sales order for that matter, you have all of these other fields that either will populate or you can fill in if needed. Sometimes this shows up down at the bottom of your screen. I actually moved it so that it's to the right of my screen so it's easier for you all to see. And if you'll notice right here, you have an option called Dropship. So let me go back and pick an actual item so you can see the detail. Sage 100 allows you to drop ship items to a customer. In Sage terminology and in Sage's mind, if you say that an item is drop shipped, it is going to assume that it is never going to come into your inventory, that it is automatically going to be shipped from your supplier directly to your customer. So it's going to record the sale, but it is not going to expect you to, when you update that invoice, it is not going to take the 10 of this item out of your inventory because it's being drop shipped. If you use purchase order, on the purchase order side, you can also say if what you are ordering from the PO side is going to be drop shipped directly to your customer so that it's never going to come into your inventory. So if you're using purchase order drop ships, when you do a sales order, that sales order that's also needs to reflect that that item is being drop shipped, because anything on the PO side that is a drop ship, it's going to be assumed that there's never going to be a receipt of goods. It's not going to come into your inventory, and it has to be reflected as a drop ship here. If you say that it's a drop ship on the PO side, but you forget to do it on the sales order side, then what happens is there's no receipt of goods, so it's not in your warehouse, but if you forget to do that here when you sell it, it's going to actually take it out of your inventory. So your inventory count is not going to be correct if you're not managing your drop ships correctly. So that's something to just to kind of keep in mind if you do drop ships, that you have to be consistent. If you use purchase order, you have to be consistent on both sides, or it will definitely mess up your inventory counts. So I did want to talk about that for just a moment so that you were aware of drop ship. So any questions on that, Jody?
No questions.
Okay, thank you. All right. So the next thing that we're going to talk about under the main tab in sales order is we're going to take a look at, auto-generate, sales order selection. And I showed you the cycle code on the repeating order. I failed to show you that field also resides on the master orders as well. If you do a standard order, that cycle code does not show up at that on the top right of your screen. But you can auto-generate orders, regular sales orders, based on master orders or repeating orders. And you can do it based on a particular customer. You can do it based on a range of sales order numbers, or you could also do it on a range of cycle codes. So this would be the example that I showed you, that you have certain customers that have repeating orders and they want them shipped out the first of every month. Then you would go into, you would select repeating orders that has a cycle code that is equal to, and again, see how you notice there's not a lookup there. I know that my code was 01, and then if I click proceed, any repeating orders that have a cycle code of 01, it will then generate a standard sales order. Now, this may be something that is or is not beneficial to you. You may want to do those one-off as the customer's requesting it, but this is something that will allow you to generate the orders automatically without doing a one-off entry of one sales order to one repeating order. So I did want to show you this functionality. And let me go ahead and close out of there. The other thing that we wanted to talk about is that you also have to auto-generate invoices selection. And what this will allow you to do is it will allow you to turn your sales orders to automatically generate invoices for your sales orders. It really depends on your business model whether or not this would be helpful to you. We have some clients that any orders that come in during the day, they automatically ship out by the end of the day. So they want to go ahead and assume that any sales orders that came in today are going to ship and they're going to invoice them. So they can use this auto-generate invoices selection to generate invoices for any sales orders that have a date, let's say equal to today. So you can go through and determine what that criteria would be. The one thing that you do need to remember about this is if you have something on a sales order, if you have an inventory item on a sales order, and that inventory item has subsequently been made inactive, using this auto-generate, it does not go back and take a look at whether or not any of those inventory items are inactive. If it sees the item there, it's going to automatically invoice the client for it, regardless of whether that item is inactive and truly isn't going to be shipped. So that is one thing that you want to keep in mind, is that this functionality does not look for inactive inventory items. But again, this is a great way to auto-generate these instead of doing them one at a time. So any questions on either auto-generating invoices or auto-generating sales orders?
No questions. And just a reminder to everyone, if you have questions, go ahead and put them into the Q&A window. Pam will continue to stop during the presentation so that we can answer those. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about, if you remember in the setup options, the very first thing that I showed you was enable shipping and whether or not you wanted to use this feature. What most clients do, I'm going to say more clients do it manually than use the shipping feature. What most clients do is they issue those sales orders. from the sales order entry when that order is placed by your customer. They then print a picking sheet, which goes to your warehouse. The folks in the warehouse pull those items, ship it, and then they let the accounting department know actually what was shipped, so that they know what to invoice, because maybe the order wasn't shipped in full. That's how a lot of clients have done that. But with the shipping feature, you actually can do a shipping data entry. And what that will do is you go into shipping data entry, and also in the setup, if you're using this feature, your shippers have an ID. So I know that shipper 1 is somebody that's already been set up. So they're going to go in and they're going to then select the order that's being shipped. Let me just grab one of these, and it'll actually show what that item is. I'm going to go to the shipping tab. They're unresolved lines, and so then they have package information, line information that they're going to fill all of this out. And then once they have finished this shipping information, they will then accept this, and then it will, at that point, it will print, it's not a picking sheet, but it will actually print a packing slip that they can print and include in with that shipment. The other thing that they can do, let me just go ahead and accept this. The other thing, there's the packing slip. The other thing that they can do, which is totally up to you whether you want your shipping folks doing this, if they have permissions, they can also go in and generate an invoice for that. You can actually even have them include the invoice in with the packing slip if you want to, but that's totally up to you. I find that most individuals do not want the warehouse staff printing invoices and doing any type of billing to customers. However, if you have a small setup, and maybe, you know, the person that does shipping also does a lot with the invoicing, then that can all be done in one area of Sage versus shipping it, printing the packing list, turning it over to accounts receivable or the sales order folks, and then them generating the invoice. And Jody, I think a question popped up.
Yes, we do have a question. Does shipping data entry just put the invoice into a batch?
Does it just put the invoice into a batch? It actually will allow them to create that invoice. So the question I'm assuming is whether or not they can generate the invoice but not have the ability to post that invoice. Is that the question, where they can send it, but then somebody, maybe in accounting, updates the sales journal? If they could maybe answer that question. Okay.
Yes, they're asking, would accounting then batch the invoice?
Yes, yes, they would. Yes, they would. And looks like we have a couple of. Oh, okay.
It was all related to that one question.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you. In the down in the setup, this is where you set up the shipper ID, so they actually have a specific login and password that's related to that shipper. So just wanted to make you aware of that, that's where that is set up in order to be able to, once you've enabled it, and then also once you've enabled it, you have a shipping options section, and you also need to go through and do the shipping setup options as well. That's hard to say. So if you do want to use that shipping, you're going to enable it under the sales order options. Then you're going to go into the shipping setup options and then also set up your shipper ID maintenance. If you're in a situation where you're thinking, you know, that may be helpful to us, but we're not quite sure, then, you know, you probably have a demo and or a test company in your Sage 100. Enable it in a demo company or a test company and go through and look to see how that would work for you. If you see any areas of concern where you might decide that you don't want to use the shipping feature, but you can go through those transactions, see what you get, and see how that flows. And then you can go back and then set it up in your live company if you want to. So you may want to consider that as well, just to kind of get a feel for it and to see if it's something that's going to work for you. The packing slip that is available through the shipping feature, you know, there are canned packing slips, whether it's a plain form or pre-printed and so forth, just like your normal crystal default forms. You also can make that, you can customize that form using crystal, so you can drop in your logo on that packing slip. You could have special instructions that always print on the packing slip, maybe that talks about your returns, you know, if a client has a return, what the process is, you know, anything of that nature. You know, if you're having an upcoming sale and you want to drop that in on the packing slip, you can do that as well. So that form can be modified just like any other form within Sage 100. So do we have any other questions?
I don't see any other questions right now.
Okay, thank you. We're going to look for a moment at the inquiry section within sales order. And the inquiry section is basically where you can go into a customer inquiry without actually having to exit sales order, go into AR, go to main, and then find customer inquiry. So this is to allow you to save some steps. So it's a shortcut. You also have invoice history inquiry that you can use, item inquiry that's going to take you directly into the inventory maintenance item inquiry screen. You can also do a sales order inquiry, the sales order and quote history inquiry, and also RMA inquiry if you're using RMAs and you have that module. So this is just an area where you can go in and save some clicks. Now, let's say that you have some folks that work in sales order, and for whatever reason, you do not want them to be able to go into customer inquiry because you don't want them to have access to anything related to accounts receivable for whatever reason. Through role maintenance, you could eliminate that as something that they would have access to. But again, this is inquiry only. It is not customer maintenance, so they're going to just be able to look up information. They're not going to be able to change anything. And that applies throughout this entire inquiry section. So that is something that might be helpful to you. And I think what we'll do now, I'll open it up and just see if there are any last additional questions. And if not, we'll talk just a minute about some of the utilities, and then we're going to get into talking about something new in 2020.
I don't see any other questions right now.
Okay. So when you're going in and you're doing quotes, you know, as we mentioned, you can give that quote an expiration date. If you don't do quotes and you actually you bypass that and you just send your client a sales order and you're waiting for them to approve it, you can have an expiration date on that sales order as well. you can go through and purge out those expired orders. So, and you can do the same thing with quotes. So let's say that your salespeople use quotes and everything typically expires, your processes, all quotes expire within 30 days. You could go in and tell it whatever frequency you want. You might want to clean it up once a year, you might want to clean it up once a quarter, but you can go in and tell it to purge expired orders or quotes. It will ask you, do you want to remove expired master orders, repeating orders, price quotes, or orders? It gives you an expired on or before date. So you're going to fill out these parameters and click proceed. Anything that falls under these parameters is going to then purge them out of your Sage, so it's no longer in there. So there are ways to clean up, you know, if you have old sales orders in there from, you know, 2014 and a lot of things need to be cleaned up, these are ways that you can purge a lot of this history. Now, you want to be very careful in these areas. Once you purge history, you cannot unpurge it. It is gone from the system, and the only way that you're going to be able to retain that information is to restore from a backup. So I would recommend that you limit who within role maintenance has access to the utilities, and I would recommend that for any utility within any of the modules within Sage. Limit who has access to this, and make sure that they understand that there's no going back once you have purged. If you start purging and realize you didn't mean to, turning off your computer is not going to help the situation. It's just going to, part of your information is going to be purged and part of it's probably going to be corrupted. So if you have a big cleanup job to do, what I would suggest is that you make sure you have a good backup first and then go through and start purging. Let's say that you have sales orders that go back 10 years. You know, instead of purging all of them at once, I might purge like a year at a time. You know, purge anything that has an expiration date of 12/31/2011 and get those purged out. Make sure everything looks good. Then move on to 2012 versus, you know, trying to purge, you know, 5,000 of them at one time. It should be fine if you do it that way. It's just my personal preference to do it a little more methodically and making sure that everything looks good before I move on to do the next step. So I wanted to show you those utilities. And I'm going to open it up one last time if anybody has any questions about anything that we've covered today. If you do have questions after the presentation, you can send me an email at pam@oasisky.com, and I will be glad to address those. If any of you are running a version that is getting set to, it is retired or ready to expire, so that'd be 2017 and lower, any version 2017 and lower, please get in touch with me about scheduling your Sage 100 upgrade. Also, if you want to take advantage of the new feature in 2019 and aren't on that version yet, we need to talk about an upgrade. And then also I'm going to turn it over to Jody in just a moment with another new exciting feature that has been added to the 2020 version. So if no one has any additional questions, if you will bear with me just a second here. And get to
I don't see any other questions, Pam, and thank you for talking that up and making my part of the presentation the exciting portion. Thank you so much for the sales order presentation. So what Pam has shown on the screen here is the new feature that is available in version 2020 that we do think is pretty exciting. And if you joined us for our Sage 100 virtual user group meeting a few weeks ago, we touched on this a little bit and thought it might be worth mentioning again today during the sales order tips and tricks presentation. So many of you are already utilizing the integrated credit card processing within Sage 100 that is offered by Paya Credit Card or Merchant Services, formerly known as Sage Payment Solutions. If you are not already using integrated credit card processing and are accepting credit card processing in some other manual format, please get in touch with me and we can talk about it and how that might make your credit card processing or accepting credit card payments from your customers much more easy for you to do in an integrated fashion. So Paya has rolled out for version 2020 and above, well, there is no above, version 2020 right now of Sage 100, a new feature called e-invoicing. E-invoicing with Paya allows you to send your PDF invoice electronically using the paperless office function that Pam demonstrated earlier in the presentation. And it will send out that email, which is now HTML formatted with the PDF attached, but it will also have a link on that email or attachment that allows your customers to click to pay. And that sets you up with what is called the Payment Center of Paya. And the Payment Center is just a really easy way for your customers to pay. So the invoice would then include a link for them to click on to take them to the Payment Center where they can initiate the payment of that invoice themselves. So rather than you processing their credit card, they can do it themselves, or they can enter bank account information so that you can receive ACH funds through the Payment Center. The Payment Center is also a really valuable portal for your AR department to assist with collections. If you want to, you can log on to the Payment Center and see the outstanding invoices that are there, resend those invoices via email directly from the Payment Center to the customer. And if you have a customer that has called and said, you know, I want you to go ahead and pay this, you can also process their payments yourself through the Payment Center. So it's just a very time-saving customer portal where your customers can, if they're, instead of calling you to ask, do they have any open invoices or they want to pay, they can log on to the portal and see their own open invoices and initiate payment themselves. This is all integrated to Sage 100, so payments made through the portal are then synchronized to accounts receivable in your Sage 100 system. That is kind of the gist of e-invoicing by Paya, available in version 2020 of Sage 100. It all starts by having a merchant services account with Paya for your credit card processing. And if you are interested in learning more about that, you can please contact me at jody@oasisky.com. That's JODY@oasisky.com. Or if you have any questions, you can pop them in the chat window right now.
Thank you, Jody. One thing I wanted to add is, you know, today's webinar was on sales order, but this feature is not just an option for sales order. It integrates to accounts receivable, it integrates to sales order, and it also integrates to job cost if you do billings through job cost. So it can integrate with all three of those modules. It's not just sales order specific. So you may have multiple companies in Sage, and some of those companies have inventory and you use sales order, and you may have another company that does not have inventory, so you just do your billing out of AR. So this would work in any of those scenarios. So if you have any questions about this that you would like to ask now, or if you have any questions about the presentation, please go ahead and enter those in. And if there are no other questions, we'll give you just a minute, but then we will be concluding our presentation today. And I want to thank you for joining us. You will be getting information about our next Sage 100 Tips and Tricks webinar, which is scheduled for Wednesday, September 16th. And I will be talking about backing up your Sage software. We're going to talk about backups and antivirus and how to try to best protect yourself during all of the cyber crimes and so forth that happen. So are there any questions, Jody?
I don't see any questions, and if we hadn't had one earlier today, I would think that the Q&A window was broken, because normally we have dozens of questions during these presentations. And in Curious Crowd today, or you covered everything so fully that no questions exist.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us. And again, if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to get with me or Jody. And if we're not the appropriate person, we will pass this along. And I do see that a question just popped up.
It's simply a thank you, Mike. Mike, thank you for thanking us. It's a pleasure having you today.
Thank you. All right, we're going to go ahead and end the session. So thank you again, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Pam. Bye.
Bye.